We are live on the small screen.
All right. Okay. Hey guys, thanks everyone for coming out. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order right now. We'll do a quick roll call here. Then, I said some more people may trickle in as we go on. So just starting from the first congressional district, Commissioner Tobias.
Present.
All right. I don't see Commissioner Anthony here. So we'll circle back. Commissioner McClellan.
Present.
Oh, I think you're muted, but I see you.
Oh, sorry. I thought you caught me. Present.
No worries, no worries. All right. Commissioner Rangel, I don't believe is here as of yet. Commissioner Ram.
Present.
All right. Commissioner Prentice.
Present.
Okay. Commissioner Bissonette.
Present.
All right. And Commissioner Phillips.
Present.
All right, guys. Commissioner Ford is here as well. And so, Phil, we can go ahead and get started just in the interest of everyone's time. Thanks, everybody, for coming out again. We can go ahead and start with the project manager update and see if what Anne-Marie has to talk about us with today. So thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
So mainly, just I want to talk about the areas that we're focusing on right now. One is, as you know, is a community of interest and community engagement. It is a topic that we need to address and make some decisions on and move forward. So other than that, that's all I'm going to say about that right now. We will start looking at assessing criteria information. I think everyone received the information that Moon and Liz sent on assessing criteria. That it's really detailed. Thank you both, Liz and Moon. Maybe you can give us a little overview about it. But I think the next step after we hear a little more is for the line drawers group to really go through it, all of us to go through it, but to really kind of make some assessments and then give some recommendations to the committee. But it's kind of dense with information, so I think we all need a little bit of time to absorb the material. And then the last thing is slides for public outreach. We have talked about various ways of public outreach, including a Facebook page, which maybe Commissioner Rangel might talk to us about later. However, what we also talked about was developing a slide deck that commissioners might use as a way of engaging everyone. And so I thought that we might need two kinds of slides. One is just like a PMC update slide, which mainly gives a little overview of who we are, why we were chosen, what our responsibilities and goals are. And then it could be updated as we move along. Maybe once we develop criteria, we can add that to it. But something that Jack has maybe had a time in his group looked over and help us. Maybe Molly can help dress it up, and something that everybody's reviewed and we're all comfortable with going public with. So that would be one. And then the other one really would focus on communities of interest. We know that the MGGG group has got the Train the Trainers program up and running, and we'd like to start engaging some of our partners and grassroots organizations to, help us get out there and collect some of that information. How exactly we do that, the commissioners, we all need to make decisions about that. Some comments that I heard, one of our grassroots supporters did attend the Train the Trainer, and I attended it as well, and it's great, and it gives us a really nice technical overview on how to put the data in, use correct keywords. It's going to make everything easier for Moon and her group, how to draw the lines. That's all very clear. But what isn't really clear, the feedback I got was how the trainers, how our people that are going out there are going to engage the public and tell them, this is what a community of interest is. This is how we define it for the People's Map Commission. this is what we're asking you to do, and this is why we're asking you to do it, and this is what's going to happen with the data. And that might be like a slide deck that might be given before somebody goes and gets a group of people and starts asking them the questions about, what is the community of interest in your area? And those presentations might be over Zoom, a lot of them could be, but I think there'll be a substantial number of people that we might have to engage in another way that aren't necessarily part of our grassroots core people that we'll need to talk about. So what I've done is I've just put, it was sent out to everybody this week, I think, and it's just like bullet points. So Molly M had suggested that maybe we just start with bullet points, and maybe Jack, you can give us some feedback, and Molly V, on if this is a good enough starting point for you guys to get going, if you would like more further information from the commission to help develop them, and also to all the commissioners, if you have any other points that are significant that you feel should be included in these kind of public outreach slides. So any comments?
I don't know what you held up.
Oh, it's just that sheet that I sent out earlier this week that has like for slide deck number 1, there's 6 points, and then there's some sub points on things to include, like what the PMC is, how the PMC has educated ourselves, criteria that we're considering for redistricting, data methodology. So that should be in your inbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent it as attachment. I wanted to make sure that Howard could get it as well. So that's what I held up. So I don't know if anyone's even had a chance to look over that document yet.
I mean, that sounds like a reasonable approach to a slide deck about who are we. So I mean, it just sounds reasonable.
Yeah, for like an overview for the communities of interest slide deck, one was just, the first slide is just redistricting criteria overview. And the second focusing in on communities of interest, defining them, why they're important, and how it differs from VRA groups. The next series would be how COI data is collected and what the MGGG's role, and how the public should interface with Moon's group. One on key organizers, how they should interface with Moon's group and get event codes or any sort of technical details we would want. And then if the public wants to interface directly with the COI software or with Moon's group, what are our comments on that? And then lastly would be how COI data will be used, how MGGG will summarize the data for the PMC, and how PMC will use data during the line drawing process.
Yeah.
So,
So go for it. Yep.
Oh, I was just going to jump in. I wanted to give the commissioners time to talk about it a little bit, but Anne Marie and I spoke earlier this week about this very concept of these slide decks that you all could take to, your own communities essentially, or with the wonders of Zoom anywhere in the state, really, that you have connections. And I talked to Molly Vidal and Molly M, but she's obviously on her way out tomorrow or Friday. And I think that's really great. If we've got the commission's blessing, what I'm going to do is try to put together slide decks, have Molly take a look at them, Vidal, and then maybe share them all with you and get thoughts. But we thought it was a good idea. I mean, or Anne Marie really thought it was a good idea to have something kind of standardized. And I think it's a great thing. So, and then I think we're going to talk a little bit more later in the meeting about general comms and outreach, what's been going on behind the scenes with us. But I just wanted to add that in now, I guess.
And I would just like to put a plug in, Anne Marie, maybe you and I could spend some time and you could catch me up on the different things that we could be doing for outreach specific to the Moons work, so that we can provide our community partners and others with a variety of things so that they feel like they're empowered to do the work that they need to do. So maybe you and I could touch base tomorrow or Friday or next week.
Yeah, and I'm sure Melissa and Susan might have some input on that as well. Maybe we could meet as a
Yeah, that would be
small
fantastic.
group.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'll just jump in with a little additional info because I chatted with Anne Marie and Susan last week about some of this, since we're kind of on the Communities of Interest Committee. And with the 6th district hearing is about 3 weeks out now, and I've had a few local groups contact me just wanting me to come to their meetings and give them an overview of what they need to know to do testimony and all of those kinds of things. So the Fair Maps Coalition groups in both Ozaukee and Columbia County, as well as the Sheboygan and Manitowoc League of Women Voters, have all contacted me. And I just was thinking, you know, I'm meeting with them over the course of the next few weeks. It would be great to be able to share the Communities of Interest districtor stuff with them, as well as the information about the hearing. And I can certainly go back to their groups after the hearing to share that information, but the more stuff we can give them, they are so ready to help out. And they really are going to be, I think, kind of the boots on the ground for us. I mean, they're really out in the community a lot more than even we are. Our districts are pretty big. So even if I know people in Sheboygan, but I don't have quite the reach out to the whole district that those grassroots groups do. So I think we really want to take advantage of that enthusiasm and that help that they're willing to offer.
Yeah, I would love for us to meet to talk about how we can do some of those things, particularly around Moon's work, so that all the information and tools that you get back are the most useful as possible for you all.
In one of the bullet points that was sent out in the PMC criterion memo from February 2021, that was actually, I believe, the 8th bullet point for Liz and Moon as well, to kind of talk about how we can do outreach for some of the communities of interest and what the best way would be. So it may be good just to have, since we have the two of you, I know you guys are only here for an hour, just to kind of go over some highlights from that and the memo that you sent out, just because I know it's a lot of information in that, but we just want to make sure we give you the floor here. So.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to say, Melissa, I'd love it if you start sending folks to, we have all the February dates up for our sessions, and I think it's a great intro. So for your community partners, please, I'll just drop that link in the chat. But this is the flyer that includes like how to sign up for the evening sessions, and we're staffed up and ready to go, and would love to have you send people our way. Great. So I will just take a little bit of time to introduce these criteria questions. And I want to say that I appreciate that this can feel overwhelming because there's so many questions for which it feels like there may not be a right or best answer. And that can be intimidating. But I think in my experience working on this issue, the important part is that you have deliberated, that you have a view about priorities that you can articulate. I think for essentially none of these questions is there like a best or right answer. And really it's about getting comfortable with understanding how these decisions flow through the whole map making process and become the metrics by which you can evaluate success later on. So what I'll do is, I know COIs are on your mind right now, so I want to overview these and kind of point out a few of the key questions that have the biggest impact, and then maybe focus a little bit on COIs. But essentially the timing on these decisions is up to you, but for some of them, and we've tried to be really clear, Liz and I, when we prepared this, we tried to be really clear. For some of them, we can give you a deliverable before you've made the decision. And in other cases, we really need to know your answer to produce the deliverable. So for instance, you tell us your contiguity rules, we can make sure that Districtr only considers districts to be contiguous if they meet your understanding of contiguity. So that means our deliverable has to wait on your decision. We've tried to be really clear in this memo about sequencing. So you don't have to make the decisions all at once, but you can maybe front load the ones that we'll have to design around. Okay, so just to go through them quickly, there are 2 federal requirements, which are population balance, and we put building blocks in there because it's so intimately related, but the federal requirement is 1 person, 1 vote, i.e. roughly equal population in the districts. And we included a link so you can see how tightly districts are balanced around the country to give you a sense. But what you'll notice if you go follow this link is that in most places, the congressional plans have the property that the biggest district in a state and the smallest district in the state are no more than 1 person different from each other. That's like as close as it gets in population balance, but not all. There are some exceptions, like notably Iowa is an exception, and they've successfully defended their higher deviation by saying that their priority was to keep counties whole, not wards, but counties. They don't split any counties in their congressional plan. So, and that holds up just fine. And similarly, Virginia, which has over 2,000 person deviation, they justified it as having to do with the state interest in, their districting priorities, and it held up in court. So you're not bound to 1 person deviation just because it's been the recent practice. But I folded the question together with building blocks here because the most natural way to tell the story of population balance is to say it's the tightest balance you could reasonably expect with these particular building blocks. That's been the kind of narrative that successfully justifies deviations of greater than 1 person. In your case, it might be wards, which are, for election administration reasons, very natural to try to keep whole. There's a good interest in trying to keep them whole. So if you were to tell us that 1% deviation, which is roughly what you have now in the legislative maps, is acceptable, then that'll help us as we build our kind of alternative ensembles of districting plans. VRA, again, there's not really a decision to be made here because the VRA is law everywhere for now. And so the question is if, as we put our VRA dashboard together so that you can explore the dynamics of effectiveness for minority voters, which parts of the state and which minority populations do you want us to focus on? So we know already, even a cursory look at the recent history of Wisconsin redistricting tells you that you have to pay attention to Black and Latino residents of greater Milwaukee. And beyond that, we'll look for opportunities where we see them, but we welcome your suggestions of other communities and other parts of the state to investigate. Contiguity is a decision that I'd love it if you might make soon, because it'll help us with a lot of the data products that we're putting together. And we put together some examples here just to literally illustrate the decisions. So one decision is if you have a district that's only connected at a single point, is that acceptable? It's really up to you. You might decide that this is acceptable, but that 2 districts can't cross over each other at a single point. Or you might decide that point contiguity shouldn't be permitted. And that's really just a judgment call. Here's one that's going to be fun. Your wards don't always look pretty. This is an actual ward. This pink creature is a single ward near Appleton. And so if you were drawing a districting plan and you colored all of these wards in pink, you'd have this kind of hanging dust created by this one ward. Is that acceptable? If it's not, then in order to capture this word, you'd be required to take all the others that fill it in so that it looks contiguous to the eye. Does that make sense? Okay. It's just a decision to make. In some ways, it's almost a cosmetic decision, but it will help us make our data products once we know your determination. The This one comes up all the time. What counts as being next to each other? Which units count as being next to each other when they cross water? And so you could decide that water crossings are fine, like in this green example. You could decide that you only want a water crossing where there's a bridge present. You could make some other decision, but that's a question to consider. How should we handle contiguity across water? And then speaking of water, there are islands. So Wisconsin doesn't have a stupendous number of these. It's not Alaska or Hawaii, right? But there still are some instances. So this is a ward, and it's pretty clear, I think, that you'd want this ward to be next to the ones that are very, very close to it. But should it be considered next to this ward or these wards down here? This is sometimes referred to colloquially as duck contiguity. Could a duck get from one ward to the other? And so this is a decision to make that will help us, again, put our data products together. I want to emphasize, I'm going to say this a lot, there's really not a right or wrong way to go here. It probably won't have a huge impact in, the quality of representation that you get downstream, but it might have a pretty significant impact on the optics of the districts, and that's important for public trust and legitimacy. So maybe those are some considerations to have in mind as you make that decision. Is that good for contiguity? Any questions or? Yeah.
Just a quick question. Say we make a decision that duck continuity is important, and so we might not like the last one, but then we find there's a community of interest that somehow, the people that live in that Iron County are totally connected to those islands or what's happening. How do they mesh together when we do the mapping?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I mentioned here in this example that a bridge might matter, because a bridge might indicate that the people on one side and the people on the other side, they shop in each other's neighborhoods, they work in each other's neighborhoods. A bridge might really be something that tells you that there's more kind of interrelation between the communities on opposite sides of water. And you're absolutely right. In some ways, later when you collect all the COI input, you might learn information from that would cause you to want to amend your notion of what's next to what. That's exactly right. And I think there's room for that. I don't mean to imply that you'll be held to the contiguity decisions you make now forever. But if you make preliminary decisions now about what you think should be regarded as next to what, that'll help us get started turning the cranks of the data machine. It's easy to amend later if you decide based on community input. Maybe that's more likely in a scenario like this. If you decide that the folks who live here have more in common with the folks down here than they do. That certainly came up in COI input that we saw in Virginia, where people were thinking about the Chesapeake Bay and kind of what's next to what. And that ultimately that conversation was really steered by community of interest narratives about, who shares characteristics that constitute kind of shared interests. So yeah, I guess my answer for that is you may well want to revisit later and add more connections. It's unlikely that COI testimony is going to want to make you take connections away, right? So now we should start by having a minimal set of connections. We can always add more later.
Jason, go ahead. Sorry, Howard, go for it.
Yeah, given that there's no right or wrong, but that decisions are necessary in order to do the iterative process, even sort of interim decision making just to test things. I have some concern that there needs to be a process specified, a real specific process specified for that decision making. The decisions won't come spontaneously. They're going to have to come from some sort of managed process, even though, and I think the fact that there's no right and no wrong makes that even more imperative, that there has to be a managed process. So I would just say to the group as a whole that somewhere in the entire process, looking at the whole picture, the iterative series, there has to be in place some point in time when you all talk to each other and make those not right or wrong decisions to deliver to the Tufts group. I'm concerned. I mean, I'm concerned that about the sort of deliberate attention that I think needs to be paid for setting up that process for making those decisions. It won't happen casually. I don't think it won't happen spontaneously of its own weight. It'll have to be managed, I think.
Jason, you want to go for it?
Yep. So commissioners and Moon, everyone, just answer a quick question about so I have 2 points. The one slide that we have here with the Iron County and the Madeline Island and the Apostle Islands. Well, that's in my backyard. I mean, our boats at the marina in Washburn, I know tons about this area anyway, but the one thing I will point out to answer the earlier question, like Iron County and the Apostle Islands have nothing to do with each other. If you see where it says New Odana, so that would be the Bad River Reservation. There's actually tribal land on Madeline Island. So if we are looking at communities of interest and tribal lands, that would be the connection right there, just east of Ashland. But the other thing, and Moon, this is my question, are you able to dial it all the way down into individual school districts on your mapping?
Actually, we just today put together a demo of showing school districts in Districtor.
So that would be my other point. Though, out of all of those islands, the biggest one to the south there, that's Madeline. That's the only one that has any kind of year-round population. All of those kids that live on that island, up until, I don't know, they go to school on K6 on the island, then they go to Bayfield, which is right there.
Yeah. Perfect. That's exactly. So
that's their school district.
Just to agree with both of the last two comments, what would be ideal is, I'm not totally sure about your subcommittee structure, but if you have a criteria subcommittee, I think coordinating with the commissioners from different parts of the state to ask the questions and have them answered in just this way, that'll give us as I said, there aren't too many islands or water crossings to worry about, but you're gonna just probably ask someone whose backyard the geography is in, come up with some preliminary connections, and again, they can be edited later, but it'll help us to get started. And I think that's just the right way to do it, is reach out, have informal conversations, and then maybe the appropriate subcommittee takes a vote, so that the democratic deliberation, deliberating about democracy is often best accomplished with a vote. So having your subcommittee take a vote, don't require necessarily, one doesn't need to require consensus in order to proceed, especially because these decisions can always be amended as their consequences come to light. But getting that started now would be ideal. Okay, so I'll continue a little bit. I won't say too much. So compactness is just one of those vague rules that there are a lot of different ways to measure. And pretty much all we're asking you to decide now, we're not asking you to pick your favorite score, but I guess the spirit of our question to you is, we could include 30 different scores in the report, or we could pick the few that come up most in court and in conversations like these about best practices, including ones that are easily, so this cut edges metric, which is now in Maptitude for redistricting, is just a really easy one to understand, that asks how many, if you're using wards, it asks how many pairs of wards are next to each other, but they're in different districts. That's a pretty nice measure of the complexity of your plan. And it's easy to score. It's so easy that we could even compute the score live within Districtor, so you could see it as you draw. So the decision to make about compactness right now is really just Are you going to have a more is more attitude or a less is more attitude? Either way, we can report all the statistics that anyone ever invented, or we can simplify it down to a few that are either most used or kind of our suggested best practices like cut edges. Okay, so unless you have any questions about compactness, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole to go down, which I'm happy to do if you're interested, but otherwise it's really just a question about whether you'd feel better about the most comprehensive reporting or being more selective. Nesting, we have a kind of very particular question for you about that. So when thinking about the assembly districts and the Senate districts that have to nest 3 to 1, that could be done by, you could decide, this is a procedural question for you. You could decide to create 99 assembly districts first and then group them in 3s to form Senate districts. You could decide to create 33 Senate districts first and then later split them in 3s to make assembly districts. Or you could decide to adjust all the boundaries together at the same time. For us, this isn't a decision that has a lot of kind of cascading impacts in the rest of our analysis, except that if you do the grouping approach, we can help you by actually writing down all of the ways to group the districts. It's rare in redistricting that you can describe all of the ways to do something, but we already have ways of if you were to go under that approach, we could actually build out for you the whole universe of possible ways to do it. I'm not sure that's a great reason for you to select that approach, but it does kind of change a little bit the kind of analysis we can offer. Usually there's so unfathomably many ways to do something that you have to just take samples. But when you group, there's a more structured universe of ways to proceed. Okay. Preserving political boundaries. This is a soft question for you. It's just how important, we already asked how important is it to keep wards whole? And this asks, how important is it to keep towns and cities whole when possible? Where do counties fall in that hierarchy of values? And there's a subsidiary question here. For a large county, you might have to split it, but then do you want to minimize the number of districts that it touches? So this is something that will actually really help us. Splitting, this one is something that you'll find, whatever decision you make now, later it's going to really help you compare 2 plans. That is, you'll be able to look at 2 plans and say which one does a better job at preserving political boundaries. To help you build something quantitative to gauge splitting by, these 2 soft sounding questions will really help us kind of put the metric together for you. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Any initial thoughts about that? How important are town and city integrity? How important is county integrity?
So in looking and talking before meeting with the line drawers and action on census committee is the same committee now. So fortunately, Jason, who was just doing all that great insider information about those islands, is actually on that committee too. And so that's actually going to be great with Commissioner Phillips as well. And so, one thing that we talked about before was in past looking at previous similar committees as ours, they have had a predilection to sticking to counties, the preservation of counties as well as looking at the school districts too as a measure of trying to keep those communities intact. And so, I think that that's a way that we will consider it as we go forward. But there is a committee that's working on that, and we'll be working with you guys in going forward in the next week or so.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah.
So there's only a few more. Preserving district cores is sometimes called, or this criterion is sometimes called least change. And this basically says, how important is it to you that the new map looks like the old map, right? In other words, you're gonna have to, of course, make some changes to the old map because the population has moved. But is it important to you that what used to be District 3, it's now clear in your new map which district is most like it? Do you want there to be a visual resemblance from the new map to the old? That's definitely something that we can measure. And if not in terms of visuals, another way to think about the similarity of the new map to the old is you could ask, you could use incumbency to measure that by asking for how many residents of the state would their representative be the same, presuming that the incumbents were to run for re-election for a moment, you could measure how many people would kind of face the same candidate that they did before. That's a way of measuring the similarity of two plans. As I noted here, the problem with using incumbency to measure this criterion is that if you take that with too heavy of a weight, it becomes just an incumbent favoring gerrymander, right? And so there's definitely such a thing as going too far in that direction. And this is just something we wanted you to think about and give us your determination of. This one is definitely not one that that's as important to decide early, but it'll help us in our plan evaluation reports when we get to that stage. Then there's the big one that you all are thinking about very hard right now, which is preserving communities of interest. So we asked you how you'd be engaging with community groups, and we've heard a little bit about that already. But another thing that I want to highlight, you all know very well from your home communities, what are the kinds of issues that animate people? What have you been hearing from people so far at your public meetings? I got to hear some public testimony, and I heard in the meeting that I attended, I heard a lot of people talking about, agricultural interests. And if I remember right, there were even people talking about like water resources. So if you're already hearing these kinds of issues and you flag them for us, that'll help us design our input collection tool around a better and more informed set of questions. So this is just an ongoing conversation. We'll be telling you what we're hearing from our input, and you should tell us the themes that are emerging from your listening, so that we can keep on refining the questions that we ask people when we pursue COI collection. The deliverable that's attached to COIs, I know this came up a little bit earlier in this meeting. We're going to aggregate them for you at several points, and in the end, we'll give you the deliverable here is a report that identifies in a heat map fashion communities that lots of testimony went to delineating. In other words, we'll be able to tell you what kinds of keywords are coming up where in the state and give you a kind of heat map of where those keywords describe people's submissions. So importantly, it then requires you to think about how to take that into account when you draw, of course, right? And so I guess I just wanted to say one quick thing about that now to get you thinking about some of the things that have been coming up in our conversations. Usually the narrative or the kind of rhetoric around communities of interest is that if you have a community with a shared interest, you should keep it intact. A little bit like we talked about intactness for cities or intactness for wards. So keep COIs intact. Something to think about is that really depends on scale. If you have a COI whose size is about, say, 30% of the size of a district that you're drawing, then keeping it whole can be really beneficial. It can ensure that the folks there have a real voice with their representative. On the other hand, if you have a community that's 80% of the size of a district, keeping it whole might actually be harmful because that constitutes packing in the district. It would actually be more beneficial to a community at that scale to be split and be a substantial part of two different districts. I only bring this up to say that there isn't an orthodoxy about what communities should be kept whole and which ones should be split. There's still value judgments to be made. But together with our report on aggregation, we'll give you a sense of which communities are well matched to which scale of districting. In other words, this community would particularly benefit from being kept whole in the Senate plan. That kind of information might help you make some determinations about the relative sizes and the benefits of intactness for the different communities that are mapped. Okay, that's just looking forward to the kind of support that we hope to be able to give you down the line as we keep collecting these. So for now, the action items on communities of interest are really just to get this outreach, and you're already doing this, but this is all we were suggesting, is that you get this outreach really ignited, start sending the community groups to training sessions, start conducting those interviews, start having people submit. The last one on this list is competitiveness and partisan fairness. Now, this is, of course, a potentially contentious issue, obviously. And so just a few conversation starters are included on this memo here. So one is, what does it mean for a plan to be competitive? Usually it means that it has more districts with a close to 50-50 partisan outcome. There are other ways to measure competitiveness. If you talk to political scientists, they measure competitiveness by campaign spending, right? That's another indicator that a campaign is competitive. Of course, the number of uncontested races is another indicator of competitiveness, although nationally, the rate of uncontestedness has been going down in the recent cycle. And then there's partisan balance. So for sure, the most widespread public barometer of partisan fairness is proportionality. It doesn't mean it's right, but it is definitely the first intuition that you'll see in news coverage or when talking to your friends. And that is the idea that if you get X% of the vote, you should have about X% of the representation. And people usually apply that intuition of proportionality to political parties, to Democrats and Republicans. And also, to some extent, people apply that intuition to racial fairness. And they think about what proportion of the demographics might correspond to what proportion of candidates of choice being elected. Here, I want to stick to the partisan question and say there's actually lots of latitude for you to decide what, if any, metrics of partisan fairness you want to adopt. The only state that has adopted proportionality in its rules is Ohio in its new redistricting commission setup. They actually, voters explicitly approved a measure asking the commission to try to pick a plan that would promote X% of the votes gets X% of the seats. So that's now in the list of rules, and you certainly have the ability to adopt that as well. But you could adopt other benchmarks and other kinds of metrics instead. There's something called the efficiency gap that in Wisconsin, I imagine you've certainly heard about because it was really at the center of the Gilvey-Whitford case that went up to the Supreme Court a few terms ago. There's also a family of metrics called partisan symmetry. So I would ask the subcommittee that's thinking about criteria, I'd also be happy to come talk to the subcommittee because this is probably too detailed for the full group, but can explain the different metrics and the pros and cons of using them. And I'd ask you to think about whether you want to adopt some measure of partisan fairness in your framework of criteria. And then the reason it's grouped here together with competitiveness is that these are often at odds with each other. And let me take just one sentence to explain why. It's actually pretty intuitive. If you build a plan with a lot of very close districts, 50, purple districts, so to speak, then if the statewide sentiment moves by even a few points in one direction or another, you could get like a massive landslide outcome for that party. And that is frequently how public opinion shifts. It shifts by a few points all over a region. We've seen a lot of that in the last few election cycles. So that's a risk. Lots of competitive districts could lead to a very disproportionate outcome. And so this is just something for you to balance. And maybe you don't need to have, a formula anointed, before you even start drawing plans. But in thinking about your own goals for competitiveness, that's an important tension to keep in mind. And as we get a little bit further through some of these decisions and we start building what I keep calling our data products, we'll show you the extent to which we see this happening, the extent to which a very competitive looking plan under a little perturbation in statewide preferences could lead to a big disproportion. And then you'll have to think about trade-offs of that kind. And that's it. Okay, so again, the hope for this memo was to be like kind of demystifying, not to be intimidating, but it is a lot to think about. And I just hope to reassure you that we'll be here to kind of support these decisions. And you can ask us questions. You can say, what if my two most important things were this and that? Can you run a random map analysis and see if I can get really good scores on these two at the same time? or do they really come at a cost to each other? You can ask us questions like that. And you could even say, you know, if we changed contiguity to allow point contiguity and you rerun a random map analysis, does it matter? Does that does that show up in any of the other things you can measure? So we're here partly as a rapid response team for your data questions. Just ask us how the criteria interact and we'll run a little analysis and get it back to you. So I hope you'll call on us in that way to help you make these decisions.
Absolutely. Tony, go for it. Did you have a question, Tony? Sorry, I see your mic.
Oh, yeah, I do actually, before he leaves. I mean, when we spoke on the phone, you had mentioned the commission might want to think about having a grad student help us from the Applied Population Lab at UW-Madison to show transparency, independence, and, you know, that this doesn't require a hired consultant. Could you just expound on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why you're talking about the Applied Population Lab specifically, and just more thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I just happen to know of their work. They do geography and demography together. And I think that's a kind of combination of skills that would serve you well. But the suggestion there was just that one of the things that I think leads to public mistrust is the idea of like fancy consultants doing things in, you know, behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms. But if you're transparent about your criteria, then your line drawers can be equally transparent about their process. And so, yeah, the suggestion was you might even think about having a student do it. That's something that I've found as I've done work in various states, is that students get really engaged and really hands-on. And as long as you're able to give them guidance about what matters, they can put the pieces together, balance all the population to whatever your desired level of balance is, and give you plans to look at. And I think it's just, this is the teacher in me, but I think it's always a win when you can get students engaged and really make it clear that what you're doing is open to anyone. So yeah, the Applied Population Lab at Madison was just an example of a group of people that have skills in mapping and skills with census data, and would probably be great to reach out to. I don't know if they have anyone who would be available, but they could probably put you in touch with other folks at the school. It would be a good starting point of folks I know in the state who do some really great work.
So just follow, do you know anybody specifically, if we decide we want to do that, that we would reach out to first?
Yeah, so Jordan Ellenberg and I had a conference at UW-Madison back in 2017. And we had a speaker from the Applied Population Lab named Malia Jones. And I think her work is terrific. And so she'd be a great person to reach out to and start to scope out possibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just for everyone. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say she's done some work trying to understand neighborhood change in Milwaukee. So I've seen some of her work and I think she's great and she'd be a good contact for you.
Before we had sort of, Molly McNabb and I had sort of realized what exactly might be needed in that department, we had spoken to a geographer that I knew through a friend, essentially, at UW Eau Claire, just to put on the table that I think that's a great idea. Any of the UW schools, and I think the only two with geography programs, doctoral level geography programs, are Milwaukee and Madison, but I'd be happy to, if the commission wants me to keep trying to kind of track that kind of person down, maybe even reach out to this Malia Jones, if you like.
Well, also just mention, Jack, that the geographer at MGGG is a geography PhD from UW-Madison.
Oh, good. We've got.
So we got lots of in-state connections. Liz has a Wisconsin connection as well. So we'd be happy to help make contacts.
Appreciate that. And of course, it is the commission's decision in the end, but I think for whatever my opinion might be worth here, that somebody from the UW system is such a cool, would be a good way to go, just from a principal point of view. But
yeah. So Jack, all I'm seeing are nods here. It doesn't look like there's that much dissent at all, if any. So I would just go ahead and proceed with that. Yeah.
Okay, I will.
Oh, and I was wondering, with other clients that you've had, do you have some examples of how like outreach has been done to the masses of students or high schools or something like that? Something that we might be able to use as a starting point?
Well, in fact, you're reminding me, I really should have done this already. That conference that Jordan and I put together in Wisconsin had a teacher training track at it. And so somewhere we have a long list of names of teachers who were already kind of trained in some of the fundamentals of redistricting. So I'll go back and tap that list and give you at least the starters of a network of teachers. But I have to tell you, one thing I've found that, in the time that I've been working on this is you just count on teacher response to be phenomenal. The sort of math civics fusion is irresistible, I think, for teachers at a lot of levels. So I could definitely get you started with some good names of folks in Wisconsin who've already thought about doing curricular design around redistricting. And I think, I should have thought of that before, Susan. Great idea. So let's keep talking about making teacher connections.
Any other questions or comments for Moon and for Liz? Don't want to leave you out, Liz.
Yeah, Liz, please, if please speak up. So if there's something else, I know we put the criteria memo together. The two of us did. So you probably have other thoughts about helpful ideas for these guys thinking through these criteria.
Yeah, I guess I can just add, this week we're going to be posting our Train the Trainer slides that we've been using for all of our January sessions. And our geographer also put together a couple of frequently asked questions documents. And so we'll be posting that on the Districtor homepage this week. And you're completely welcome to download the slides and change them and tailor them as you need to for your purposes. But those can kind of be a good starting point if you're thinking about creating your own slide deck and running your own meetings.
Yeah, no, I think all that's great. And, we've already been talking, just trying to sort of get our outreach component done as well as get our criterion rolling here. So I think, the document that you guys put together is great at kind of giving us direction. And it seems like all the subcommittees are kind of going in that direction too. We had recently talked last week about sort of getting more communities of interest involved, especially in knowing the trainer events are going on. And so that's something that we're working on as well to try to see if we get more attendance to that too. So I will be sure to distribute widely as we go through that. So. All right, guys. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, it's great to see you, and let's be in touch.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, guys. So our next bullet point here is just so we can kind of put these together too. So anything from the January 28th or meeting, as well as the public commentary. Anyone have any comments before we go into to our next bullet points? The one thing that kind of, go for it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Chris. I was just going to say the Iowa model slides were really good. I was wondering if maybe Michael Lee could send those on to us. It's a good discussion.
I can certainly ask him. I can't imagine why he wouldn't. I sent both of those presenters thank yous on the commission's behalf. I assumed that everyone would be okay with that. I didn't hear back from Michael Lee again, but I'm sure he'd be happy to send it to us. So I will put that on my list.
Thanks.
I have to tell you guys, I was a little nervous to get somebody from New York through Texas to New York to talk about Iowa, but I thought he really covered everything. So yeah, not to that's just praise of Michael Lee, not of the person that found him.
That's fair. I was going to bring up one of the things that they brought up too was the Michigan criteria. The way that they were ranking the criterion as well was really interesting as well, and something that we can discuss and know in our subcommittee and when we do the subcommittee presentation and coming up too. But just to kind of get that ball rolling, I know Howard has been talking about that for a while too, that we need to kind of get the ball rolling on that, which it seems like we're in that way. So yeah. Anything else that anybody had for Susan? I see you.
No, I just had like a little bit of a conundrum about trying to understand. So there's, she had showed 9 different areas of consideration. And within that, we have to make a lot of decisions. But then the question is like, how do we rank those 9, or how are they weighted? Or do we just do multiple iterations of all those things? It just starts getting to be like exponential complexity. And how does one community of interest rate over another community of interest who might be in the exact same place? And I mean, I understand it's going to be like an exercise of trade-offs, but maybe y'all can explain kind of like what is the starting point, if you will.
Can I make a?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Howard. Yeah.
I don't know that there's a perfect answer to this that comes out of some set of expertise, but it strikes me that if, for example, the committee that Tony has been talking about put something together on a tentative basis that's well informed and that it has support from Moon and so on, and puts it out to all of you. And Susan, I don't know if you're on that committee. I don't know who I'm talking to here yet. But anyway, it strikes me that you all will take a look at it and see what, if anything, is problematic about the proposal. And you will be looking at it through the lens of all these conversations that we've having that seem very diffuse, but they're actually, I'm sure they're sinking in somewhere. All that stuff is residing in your brain. And when you look at a particular outcome, you're going to, things are going to either be comfortable for you, or there are going to be some things that you find problematic. And at that point, hopefully you will talk to each other about those problems. There'll be some sort of an organized dialogue among you about I'm a little uncomfortable with this, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. You will see what you can, and it's in that kind of a conversation. It seems to me that, in fact, a consensus is likely to arise. I don't know any other way of doing it, to be honest with you. It's a sort of trial and error kind of thing, as long as the goal is to get comfort from all of you. Because as she keeps saying, and I know it's a little frustrating to hear this, there's no right or wrong. There's only your comfort. Okay, I mean, given that you're not going to make a legal error, and so I think that I just, my only concern is, and maybe I'm magnifying the concern, is that you provide yourselves with enough time and opportunities to actually have that series of conversations in which you express your discomfort, so that something can be changed, or you can look at other possibilities and get back to a modified version and so on. So I have faith that if you have enough time and you're deliberate enough about it, it's all of the stuff that seems like a can of worms is actually it's gonna be okay. It's gonna work out okay.
Tony, go for it.
Yeah, just gonna say to Susan and whoever, I mean, my understanding of the subcommittee right now, the line drawing in the census is myself and Jason and Chris and Anne Marie. But I mean, absolutely, we don't want to be exclusionary. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a meeting in the next week or so. We just need to set it up. And I think it sounded like Moon or Liz or both may want to be at that meeting. But I think when we send out that invite, Anne Marie, we need to include every commissioner, because they all need to be a voice if they want to be on that. But then I think our plan, Susan, was to think what we think and give it to the rest of you commissioners. But
yeah, it makes all the sense. And I'm curious about, like, at what point do we share that with public, or not? I know everything is public that we're doing, but that do we have like a response period or something if we put things out, or?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Sorry, and that's something to consider as we go over. I think initially the way that we had it laid out before, this all came to be, Susan. We met with Howard at the very beginning of the year on a phone conversation, and said, we need to come up with a criterion. At that point in time, Moon, we had a meeting with her subsequently after that, and we kind of decided to go the approach of having the subcommittee work with.
You've got mail.
I haven't heard that in years. And so, essentially, I think probably a good idea is to kind of get a consensus within the group and then meet with Moon's group beyond that. And then before we make a public, this is what we're going with, just to have a good consensus within the group. That way, we have something that is concise and something that is, at least agreed upon to a majority extent before we, kind of go and publicize it. Jackie, you were gonna have something else to say?
I just wanted to add that anytime you've got more than 4 people in one place, we're under the obligation to notice the meeting as an open meetings notice. I think I speak for Maddie and Molly and everyone who's staff in the government, that if you guys want to do a meeting at any time, we'll set it up. I mean, this shouldn't be an impediment to all working together, but we just don't want to run afoul of that. So keep that in mind, and I appreciate it.
And Howard, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to speak from some experience, and Jack, maybe you've had the same experience with rulemaking. When you put something out for public comment, you have to be prepared to respond to public comment. And when the public comment is all over the place, it's really difficult to respond to it. And it's likely to put you in a very defensive mode. And I just want you to be thoughtful about putting yourself in that posture, because if you once you land somewhere, even though you express it as having landed somewhere tentatively, and you put it out for public comment, and you get 3 or 4 very strong objections to what you've done, but they're contradictory of one another, you're in a peculiar posture. And I really think that at some point you need to think about what is your responsibility, and whether or not your responsibility is to defend what you've done in a sort of political way. Because once you put something out for public comment, you are going to get political responses. You're going to get responses from people who think, for example, that they're losers under your map. Okay, and whether you want to match wits with those people, I would say, is something to think about. I don't mean to say that you can't match wits with them. I just think you might not want to match wits with them.
Have our I's dotted and our T's crossed is what Howard is saying.
Well, I don't think, I mean, if people are at risk, if you're asking for comments from people who you put at risk, then you're going to get strong comments, and I don't know that you want to get into that kind of a match with them.
Go for it, Emery.
Oh, just with the line drawers group and setting up that meeting, Tony, one of the things I was thinking is if we just kept the meeting to the 4 so that we can at least discuss our questions and before we bring in Moon and things like that, so we're not using her time unwisely.
Okay.
If that works for you, maybe we can set
Yeah.
that up. Maddie, I think, is working on it. Maybe, next Wednesday, or she'll get it set.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments about the 28th meeting, or hearing? Otherwise, we can move on to our next bullet point. All set. All right. So I had Jack to have the floor for a little bit too for any updates.
So I don't have anything explicitly planned, but I did just first of all want to say, for I think probably the 3rd time now, and maybe 4th or 5th for some of you, that I'm really happy to be working with all of you. Sad to see Molly go. I know you all share that sentiment. And I just want to echo again, I've met with Anne Marie. I'm going to be talking to Tony tomorrow, but any of you, if you ever want to talk, you can feel free to either email me, or I think I said I was going to send my phone number around. I will do that. As far as updates go, we've got 3 more of the congressional district hearings, and I'm working on lining up speakers for those. And otherwise, I think what you're probably all most interested in is what we're going to be doing on a comms and outreach level. Molly Vidal is here, and I don't mean to throw her too much on the spot, but she came up with a communications plan that, we only have 3 of these congressional district hearings left. So one of the goals that she states is to standardize our production of those meetings, our promotion of those meetings. But I think the bigger part is to just generally bring attention to you all, you 9, and your work, and then to try to do essentially standardize our outreach on to the grassroots groups and the stakeholder groups. So Anne Marie actually sort of simultaneously came to me and had previously come to Molly McNabb with the slide deck idea. I think that's really great. Not only because, you know, Molly and I might have some things to say about what would go into that, what might be smart to put into that, but also just to keep all 9 of you on the same message and sort of create a bounds by which we can say, go forth and promote all you like. But in addition to that, I think Molly's has talked to 1 or 2 of you, but we're going to be trying to get you all in media more. To the extent that you're comfortable. I personally think a great thing about this commission is that you guys are not all like smooth talking politician types. So the fact that you might not be the most comfortable about being in front of talking to a reporter or something is what I think also makes you great. But whatever, when it comes time, whatever is everyone's comfortable with. I know there's been some talk of letters to the editor and stuff like that, but essentially, my goal, it was also Molly McNabb's goal, but is to get as much of this work out into the public. And because not only because that's good in and of itself, but it'll also make the end product better. The more public input we get, even just the being able to say we got X number of people or you got X number of people who reached out. So I've been a little overwhelmed taking over for Molly, but I am going to give it my all. So I'm happy to be working for you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now, or if you're more comfortable one-on-one, do that.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Any questions or anything for Jack with regards to that, guys? Oh, okay. All right. So we can go ahead and get into the subcommittee updates. We've been already talking about it, Tony and Jason, if you guys have anything to add for the actual census and Alliance for Us.
No, I agree. I think we hit every point, so I don't think it'd be worthwhile to say any more right now.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Expert selection, nothing really there at this point in time, working with Moon's group. Outreach and engagement. Any updates from that? I know Ben was supposed to be on here, but we have been talking a bit. I know, Elizabeth, do you have anything to add for?
Yeah, sure. So we had a meeting last night, and Molly V, if you wouldn't mind piping in just in case I didn't take as great as notes. But, you know, when we really realized that there needs to be some outreach, so we did kind of discuss, you know, the possibility or looking at doing, having a Facebook or utilizing social media, but particularly the possibility of having a toolkit for commissioners to utilize to be able to push through their own social media accounts. So that was one piece. Another piece is to also make communications available in different languages. You know, we need to really think about that. Having commissioners reach out, you know, granted there's only 3 congressional district hearings left, but, you know, commissioners reaching out to individuals for participation, or at least for public comment, and getting that word out there. Let me see here. What else am I missing? I thought there were maybe 1 or 2 other points. I think too, working with Molly and getting just a content calendar put together as well, and you know, what and when we want to start pushing out things. Oh, and I think too, going back to the social media, and that trying to get some of our supporters and other organizations out there and helping push out that information via their social media accounts too, because they already have thousands of people following them. We think that that would be really beneficial. So, Molly, am I missing anything?
No, I think you hit it on the head. We talked a lot about the benefits to having a Facebook account for you all, a centralized one versus a Twitter account. And then we talked about what would motivate your average citizen to want to follow something like People's Maps Facebook. There probably wouldn't be a lot of motivation for your average citizen to follow. But if there are ways that we can package tool kits and empower all of you all and your contacts, we sort of feed the content into the bloodstream, and you're going to catch people who normally wouldn't even know to follow a Facebook account that is People's Maps Commission. That said, we also talked about the importance of having maybe a Twitter account that is centralized and as a People's Maps Twitter account, so that we can be pushing out updates about all the work that you all are doing. Twitter tends to be more sort of legislative and decision makers in the media and that sort of thing. And so that would be a good way for us to get the word out about what you're doing in a centralized way, and then provide you all and everyone who wants to do the good work toolkit content, so that you're pushing it out through your accounts. And the same with the Fair Maps Coalition and anybody else who wants it. So we talked a lot about those things.
Do we know where we are in terms of like getting the green light on that for Molly and Jack, like next steps for that?
I think we might be able to have an answer by the next working meeting. We'll have some clarity on that, but maybe by next week, midweek. We've started off, or I'm sorry, not started yet, but we've planned a weekly sort of check-in meeting on all this stuff to make sure we are not internally dropping stuff. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that sometimes things might not happen, but some of it is just simply the fact that we have day jobs beyond. This is part of our day job, of course, but like we have other duties, and that's not to say this isn't very, very important. So I think it'll be good that we internally are a little more streamlined, and hopefully we'll have some answers for you next week.
But baby steps, silver lining. We do have some social media graphics for you all that I think have been blessed. And so I'll send them out to you all for the next hearing. And Commissioner Tobias, I have made special ones for you that are just for your district. So as soon as this meeting's over, we'll send them to you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I just had a question about the Facebook thing, just to clarify. So are you saying that there will be a Maps Commission Facebook page that we will then have tools to drive our followers to that page? No.
So and again, if I think there's a lot of different approval processes on your end and others to decide what the best approach is. In my experience, the best scenario is to have you all have tools that you can push out through your own accounts, or that the Fair Maps Commission can push out through their own accounts, and it drives people to your website, either to register to testify, watch the hearings, submit comments, eventually doing the communities of interest submission, all of those things, looking at all of the other things that we're going to put on the website. That's where you're going to want to turn everyone to. So we would create things for you and others to push out.
And Molly, is the idea there that essentially if we had a People's Maps Commission Facebook, we wouldn't get anyone more than what the Fair Maps Coalition has. So if we do what we maybe haven't been doing adequately yet, but if we moving forward give them the tools to promote these things, we would essentially fill that role. Yeah. You're filling the bloodstream and you're capturing people in theory who normally don't even think to follow anything related to redistricting.
Okay.
That said, I know that we've discussed doing a People's Maps Twitter, because that way it's not necessarily driving people to testify, although we could, but it's much more providing transparent updates about your work groups, live tweeting the hearings, that sort of thing.
So I don't want to be difficult, but
go ahead, do it.
As a municipal employee, my personal social media is pretty locked down, and I fully intend to keep it that way. So I'm not.
No, that's fine. And there are others
using my Facebook page to promote the Maps Commission, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think then what we do is we lean heavily on the Fair Maps folks in your area and that sort of thing to promote. and other partners. In theory, we would have lots and lots of partners that we could give. The Fair Maps Coalition, there's lots of partners that we would give them the toolkit so that all of their channels are sort of blasting out.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And Molly and I have talked about this a couple times already, but I don't want to give anybody the the illusion that you have to do this, right? And so this is not something that we're all obligated to do. It's just we've just been brainstorming ways to kind of get in contact with the people who otherwise would not be on the lookout on a Thursday, saying like, hey, let me check out this Maps Commission's meeting, right? And so for those people who are stakeholders, they're going to know about this. They're going to be following us. They've known about us for the entire thing. They probably read our bios and things like that. But if we have a Twitter handle or something like that, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a link that pops up on somebody's feed, they can click on it, they can go to it, figure out a little bit more. We're trying to tap that market that doesn't necessarily know what our process is or why we're doing all this on our quote unquote off time, right? And so, but again, I don't want you to feel like you're obligated to do that from a social media standpoint for your own personal page. So.
But yeah, this first step I think is giving you guys the tools to do this if you can and want to. So
like I said, we have some things that we can hand off to you guys tonight that are sort of baby step items for you, and feel free to pass them along to whomever you want to pass them off to. The graphics are pretty basic, so feel free to send them out to the the Maps Coalition folks or whoever you're comfortable with using them.
All right, guys. Any other questions about the outreach? Thanks, Elizabeth, for providing us with that. That's awesome. Thanks, Molly, as well, and Jack. So, the next one, Emery, do you have anything beyond what was discussed earlier for the project? Okay, perfect. And then community of interest, Melissa, do you have anything?
I don't have anything additional to add that I didn't say earlier, just that Anne Marie and Susan and I met last week and had a really good conversation about a variety of things that have you've all heard about in terms of the outreach and publicity stuff. So that's all I've got.
Awesome, and thanks, Jack. Jason had something there too.
Yep, I'm just curious. So I've had a chance to meet with some of our local tribal leaders, and I'm curious, like, how, if they're identifying like communities of interest, how would you guys like that information? Should I put it in an email for you, or if I have like points of contact, that kind of thing? What's the best format to give that to you?
I think I can start, and then if others have ways to add on. So that's part of what we're going to be building out on the website. That's supposed to be ready to roll ahead of the next hearing, which will be exciting. Is that it'll be like a built-in direction to Districtr, and also like just a really quick way for folks to submit any sort of input, whether that's in text form, map form, picture form, whatever. And it could be as specific as a community of interest input, or saying a district as a whole. It could be an entire state map. So that's in the future how that's going to happen. But in getting that information, I mean, I think it's kind of like a dual priority of getting the information to all the commissioners, and then also to MGGG, so they can use that in their analysis. And so I think, frankly, the best way to do that is to have them submit it via the website and submitting public comment that way, the link that's on the website. And then my goal is to get you all an updated spreadsheet from all the past hearings of the written testimony and verbal testimony, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow. So then you all will have that, and that will also go to MGG to start processing and kind of culling that data as well. Is that helpful?
Jason, I was going to say, if it was me and I had specific groups of interest, and I think I'm where you're at, like, I have no idea what to do with it except, but you might include Liz Kopecki from MGG. She's supposed to be our direct contact, and just send her the email. Her email address is embedded in some that I've been sending out too. So it's on our email site. So that would be one of my suggestions.
And I guess to clarify my point, I've had conversations with tribal chairmen and so the way they're used to doing business is government to government relations and formal letters and things that are very vetted through the tribal legal process. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
And I think that could absolutely, although it perhaps feels a little bit less formal, I think that absolutely could be the kind of content that is submitted to the website as well, frankly. And then it's like on me to get that translated and over to you guys too. So that I will intake it in any form, and we'll make sure that it is digestible and usable for you all and for MGG too, to be able to dual track it.
Any other questions at all, I guess, for communities of interest? All right. And lessons learned. So that's essentially myself and Ruben. And so I got nothing to add from that. And I can reach out to him and kind of submit to you guys if anything else. So anything in general, any other final thoughts before we go ahead and adjourn, guys? Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for coming out here. I feel like in going forward, we got a lot to work with here, and I'm glad that the subcommittees are working very hard on all this. Susan, you had something? Sorry.
Oh, no.
I saw you unmuted. Sorry. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and we'll be in contact, guys. Thanks.
Have a good evening.
You.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.